Welcome to Puro Politics, the political podcast of the San Antonio Express News. I'm Gilbert Garcia, opinion writer and columnist, and I'm joined by
Carrie Clack, columnist, editorial board.
Nancy Pryor-Johnson, editorial board deputy editor.
Metro editor Greg Jefferson.
Today we're going to talk a little bit about the very early mayoral campaign announcement from Councilman John Courage. We're going to talk about what's probably the most interesting primary race on the ballot in March, at least on the Democratic side, which is the U.S. Senate race. But I want to start off talking about the standoff that we're seeing at the border. And the backdrop to this is that as part of Greg Abbott's Operation Lone Star, we've seen Texas National Guard, TPS troops on the border in Eagle Pass. They have put up razor wire in the Rio Grande, which separates U.S. and Mexico. They have blocked access to Border Patrol agents when it comes to Shelby Park, which is close to the border. And this has been kind of building up. We had the Biden administration filed a response to this. And a week ago, the U.S. Supreme Court, in a 5-4 decision, said that Border Patrol agents could remove the razor wire from the river. And at least at this point, it looks like the response from Governor Abbott has been to defy that Supreme Court decision. And he is getting a lot of support from his fellow Republican governors across the country. And Carrie, you had a great column about this over the weekend. And when you look at this, is it your sense that Greg Abbott he's actually wanting to create this sort of this battle? He's wanting to be able to lock horns with the administration over this.
It's hard to give him the benefit of the doubt that he's not. He's been pushing for this fight, since Operation Lone Star, but it really has escalated with that closing of Shelby Park. Mm-hmm. It started also with the barbed wire and the buoys and everything, but when you're saying that you're putting Texas National Guard, saying that this is a public park and federal agents cannot come in. And then you have a Supreme Court decision saying that, it's an emergency decision that they can, that the Biden administration can cut the wires, and you're still being defiant. And that's the word, defiant. Mm-hmm. And you can't help but think, as I wrote, of during the civil rights movement of Farbus in Arkansas and Barnett in Mississippi and Wallace in Alabama, mm-hmm. Defying the federal government because it played well to their base, but then ultimately they had to back down. Wallace did stand in the doorway at the University of Alabama. I really am curious to see how this works out, whether or not.
What's the end game? Like, what does he envision as the end game?
I don't see. I do think it's dangerous. I do think you're going to have you just follow what's happening on social media and all the people, these militias and folks that are coming down to Texas and folks is urging, hold the line and go Texas.
Well, and you're seeing people like Tucker Carlson basically saying the men of Texas need to rise up, and what is that saying? That this is take up arms and go to the border? We're seeing the language. Because the constitutional justification that the governor is presenting on this, and Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick is saying, is that this constitutes an invasion, and that they have the constitutional right as a state to ward off an invasion. Now, our founding fathers, they were envisioning mm-hmm. a military invasion, an armed invasion, yes. Right. And the states dealing with it, while waiting for a federal response. If the federal response isn't there yet, the states can go in there and deal with that.
The issue of nullification was kind of decided during the Civil War, and it was the same thing that Wallace, Southern governors tried to bring up during the Civil Rights Movement, that the idea that the states can nullify federal law, can nullify the Supreme Court. But also specifically with that word invasion, you would mm-hmm. think that of all governors, this is the one who would have mm-hmm. learned this lesson after El Paso. Mm-hmm. When he used that language in his campaign material, and pretty much admitted that, I think he may have used it to say we did some things wrong and that he wouldn't use it again. But it's that language that's going to antagonize, that's going to move someone to not to not just do what we saw happen in the Walmart in El Paso, but all these folks coming down to the border looking for a fight with the federal government.
I don't see it de-escalating. I don't know what it would take. I mean, you just can't go and ignore the Supreme Court. I mean, it's absurd, beyond absurd. And I mean, how about we're going to ignore the Supreme Court about Roe v. Wade being overturned? Like, let's just, it's just silly.
Yeah,
it's beyond.
I mean, and this isn't necessarily. I mean, the basic point it really should be this is a Supreme Court decision, and you have to respect the decision whether you agree with it or not.
Yeah,
but the political backdrop is this is a very conservative Supreme Court that made this decision. And they've got 3 Donald Trump appointees on there. And even they have said ultimately the federal government has the authority over this.
Yeah. I mean, there's always a possibility that Biden federalizes Texas.
I'm waiting for it.
Yeah. And that, I mean, who knows what kind of explosion will follow from that. But I mean, I think that strikes me as a very real possibility.
And that's what happened in the 3 specific cases that I mentioned that you ended up with Eisenhower, then Kennedy, Eisenhower in Arkansas, and Kennedy in Alabama and Mississippi federalizing national troops. And then they backed down. Now there was violence at Ole Miss, but it's that's the thing is Abbott thinking that far along? Does he actually want a confrontation? But that's going to be the key again, what Biden does with regards to federalizing the Texas National Guard.
Yeah, and we've just seen it really, if you look at this historically over the last 10, 15 years, it's been an escalation of this kind of war between Texas governors and Democratic presidents over the border. We had Rick Perry, I think, handing a letter to Barack Obama when he arrived in Texas at the airport saying, you need to secure the border. And we've seen Operation Lone Star, which I think was justified initially as this is going to be there to supplement the federal presence on the border. They're not supplementing that. They're impeding them. They're blocking them.
Right. Taking over,
Now, this is super cynical, right? but
I want to hear this.
Brace yourself.
Great.
Okay.
I know, right? It's a presidential election year.
Yeah.
And Donald Trump is likely to be the Republican nominee. This plays in beautifully. Perfectly. Which is why you saw Trump weighing in, stiffening the spine of Greg Abbott and calling on other Republican governors to help this guy out.
Yeah.
I mean, it's tailor-made for a general election in which you're trying to demonize like a whole segment.
I'm glad you mentioned that because there's a thought that came to my mind over the weekend and was kind of spurred a little bit by your column, Gilbert, about Haley and how she's what she should have done earlier in taking on Trump. But I got to thinking, she's staying in the race.
Yeah.
Because there's a chance. I mean, there's a chance with we just lost another major case on Friday. There is a chance that something can happen where he is not on the ballot. Haley is not someone I think a lot of folks Trumpsters would go to.
That's true.
Greg Abbott, king of the border, making the stand against the federal government.
This is interesting.
We're at the Republican convention, maybe later. Trump can't be the candidate. We don't want Haley. Who are we going to go to?
DeSantis is already kind of damaged goods politically. Yeah, and the point I wanted to make on Haley too is just that, I mean, in the last week she's gotten kind of feisty, although I think she's still kind of giving him a hard time about like his temper tantrum last Tuesday after New Hampshire.
Getting her name wrong, getting her confused with Nancy Pelosi.
But she's still not really bringing up the insurrection after everything. I mean, the really fundamental things. And she got in the race a year ago, and it took her till like a week last week to finally say, well, maybe I had to like actually make the case against him to some degree.
Yeah.
But yes, and we were talking about Trump, and I'm glad Greg brought that up because one of the issues, hanging in the background here is the fact that there's been an effort to come up with a bipartisan immigration bill. It's tied to Ukraine reform, and even before seeing it, Trump has told Republicans vote against this thing. And based on what we know, I think this bill would probably beef up security on the border. It would speed up the asylum process. Probably not something that is going to be 100% satisfactory to anybody in either party, but it would probably be seen by many Republicans as a step in the direction that they want to go. But Trump is encouraging them, vote against this. And it looks like this is basically, we don't want things getting any better at all on the border in an election year.
Yeah. House Speaker Mike Johnson, totally on board with Trump. So yeah, this isn't.
But I think because they don't want the Biden administration to get any kind of any kind of support or benefit from it, and they just want it to be an ultimate. I mean, it's too lucrative for both sides to keep the fight going.
McConnell, I mean, basically saying, according to Punchbowl, telling the Senate that this is what the candidate, this is what the nominee wants to, because he won't say his name, what he wants to run.
They don't want to make it better, right?
Which also defeats Abbott's argument, right? Yeah. Okay, if you've got this crisis where we need all these folks at the border, we're going to stand up against against federal agents to keep this invasion from coming in, but then you've got Trump and McConnell and Johnson saying, well, we can wait till January.
I like to point out you had air quotes around the word invasion.
Air quotes invasion.
I want to make sure that people who are listening know that.
Yeah, watch it on YouTube so you can.
Yeah, there you go.
And it's
Thank you.
It's interesting because the Wall Street Journal, a conservative voice on this, essentially said that if Republicans block this, they're handing Biden a victory because it allows him to at least make the argument, we tried to do something, and Republicans for political reasons didn't want to do it, and also Republicans in 2020, a common argument from Ted Cruz and others was Democrats are. They're blowing up the COVID response. They're actually doing things to make to prevent the economy from recovering, and they're imposing excessive restrictions, or they're trying to when it comes to COVID, because they don't want they want the economy to be in bad shape, so Trump will lose. Yeah, and I mean there are probably differing opinions on whether that was happening, but this looks like the same thing happening from the other parties.
It's pretty explicit. They're not trying to hide it.
Yeah. Well, last Thursday, Northside Councilman John Courage announced his candidacy for mayor in 2025, and this is a little more than 15 months before the mayoral election. And Greg, you have a much better sense about political history in San Antonio. Is this the earliest that you see? I can't remember a major candidate.
No. I mean, honestly, I was racking my brain last week. I can't think of anything. I mean, when Ron Nierenberg ran for mayor the first time, I think he announced the December before the election. Yeah. He was a sitting council member. Right. And here John Courage is a full year and a half, something like that, ahead of the next election. He's announcing.
He said the early bird gets the worm.
The closest one I could think of was Mike Viviel.
Yeah,
and
it was an unusual
July,
situation.
August of 2015. Yeah, it wasn't
because Julian had left to go to HUD, and so. We knew that we were going to have a mayoral election in the next year. It was going to be an open seat for and so so Mike, I think, thought in that case it made some sense to say I'm going to jump in, maybe keep some other candidates out of the race if I get in early.
Yeah, and he'd been a state representative, and he needed to make himself known to other precincts around San Antonio. Didn't do that.
But full disclosure, I was working for Mayor Taylor at the time, when Mike jumped in, Mayor Taylor had said that she wouldn't be running, and then so had Letitia Vanderput. So at the moment that Mike Viviel jumped in,
he had a clear field.
He had a clear field.
Yeah. I should note that I
we both.
I made the bad decision to try out politics once. I'll never do that again. But yeah, I did work for Mike Bureau.
We were both
I was just waiting for that.
Yeah. I have to cop to that. So.
But in this case, this John Courage running is not going to keep candidates out of the race.
No. I mean, I think it could be that, you've had Manny Pelaez, the council member representing District 8, like he's not formally announced, but he might as well have. I mean, he's been hyperactive over the last 4 or 5 months. All kinds of policy proposals coming to him or coming from him. He's weighing in on issues. Doesn't matter if it's pertinent to District 8. And he's going to weigh in on them. And that Melissa Cabello Haverda, she's also kind of exploring a run. And it could just be that John Courage felt like he needed to. We've known that he was interested in running for months now, since September, October. It could be that he felt like, given all of the behind the scenes activity, kind of all of the jockeying, he needed to be the first out, kind of formalize his candidacy, get out as a mayoral candidate and approach, business interests, neighborhood groups, civic groups, and start raising money in a serious way.
Yeah, that's how I see it too. He thinks it's going to get crowded.
Yeah.
He wants to raise money.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how effective that's going to be, but that might have been.
Yeah,
and of course, we got a state primary election coming up in a few weeks. We got the November election, and so there's just going to be there's a lot competing with this, and that's why I think it's common for candidates either for mayor or city council to wait till after the November. Either midterm elections or presidential election cycle to just, and usually you'll see something like maybe right after that, maybe mid-November, early December. So another thing that happened was when Councilman Courage made his announcement, it was kind of a stormy event.
Yeah.
He had some pro-Palestinian protesters there, they kind of shouting him down while he was trying to speak. I mean, it was
There's some F-bombs.
Yeah.
It was
intense. It got pretty intense. And what these activists are after are a ceasefire resolution at City Council.
She had opposed.
Yeah, he had opposed. It seems very unlikely that there's going to be a resolution vote at all after Manny Pelaez pulled his support. So it takes minimum of 3 council members who can call us, this is under the city charter, they can call a special meeting. Pelaez, Jalen McKee Rodriguez and Terry Castillo did that for a ceasefire resolution. Manny backed out and it kind of created chaos. Although there would have been chaos had there been a resolution vote also. But yeah, that's what activists are extremely upset about now. And they have, they brought a city council meeting to a standstill with, chanting and protests nearly 2 weeks ago now. They've promised to, continue that kind of action. They've been a little, they didn't happen last week at city council, but, they disrupted Mayor Nirenberg over the weekend at one of his events and at Courage's announcement. So they're still there. And no reason to think they won't keep coming back until there's some decision on a resolution vote.
Yeah. And I'm guessing we probably won't see another major candidate announce for mayor for a while. I mean, he might have the field out there.
Maybe.
And if they do, what steps would they take? I mean, there's really nothing they can do for that not to happen again, right?
Right.
I mean, to prevent that.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah.
I mean, you could always do a Zoom announcement.
Or maybe just at a venue where you have a little bit more control. I understand the optics of the steps of City Hall because this is what you want to do.
Yeah.
But maybe you just have a venue where you have a little bit more control over. Ultimately, you really can't control.
Yeah, and I mean, for people who haven't seen the video, I mean, there was a protester there with a bullhorn who was yelling, "How many more kids?" And in reference to kids in Palestinian kids in Gaza who have been killed by Israeli attacks. I think John Courage, in going through the crowd, actually tried to shake that person's hand, and he said, "Don't you effing touch me!" And I don't I don't shake hands with someone who has blood on their hands.
Which that is such a John Courage thing to do. And that's totally his personality, and he mild-mannered and, former teacher, right? And I don't know. I think I think he did the right thing. I mean, what would most people do in that situation? Yeah. But I think at this point now, everybody else has to be prepared for that,
Yeah. Wanted to talk a little bit about the U.S. Senate race on the Democratic side. This is the race to find a nominee to challenge Ted Cruz in November. And over the weekend, on Sunday, there was a debate which included San Antonio State Senator Roland Gutierrez and Dallas Congressman Colin Allred. We've seen polling recently from Emerson College, which showed Congressman Allred with a strong lead over Roland Gutierrez and the rest of the field. And the polling also had hypothetical races between Ted Cruz and Roland Gutierrez and Colin Allred. With both of those scenarios, you had very close races. I think Colin Allred was maybe 2 points behind Ted Cruz and Roland Gutierrez was 1 point. Again, polling is imperfect, probably more now than ever, and this is very early. And Democrats have gotten their hopes up in the past, but I think Democrats could look at this with some sense of encouragement that maybe they have a chance. Because even for all the money raised by Beto O'Rourke in 2018 and all the national attention he got, I don't think he was ever ahead in any of the polls. I think he was always a few points behind. Yeah. So to be possibly within striking distance this early, I think is encouraging. But I wanted to talk a little bit about the race will probably come down to Colin Allred and Roland Gutierrez. Mm-hmm. And Roland Gutierrez is really, I think, has kind of defined himself as, he's kind of the firebrand. He's going to take on the extremist Republicans. He's going to fight them. Colin Allred is, I think, maybe kind of presenting himself as more of a bipartisan figure, kind of working with the other side. You think that's fair?
Yeah, and I think the strategy fits both of their personalities. And it's interesting because both of them have become somewhat national figures because of MSNBC. Allred is on for, when they talk about voting rights and different issues over the last few years. And of course, Roland, because of Uvalde, which, and again, to his credit, more than any other elected official has been the voice for those families and has, voice for a lot of Texans who have been outraged. And it's definitely his personality to be that fire. Whereas Allred, and it's something we've talked about before, that as a black man running for the U.S. Senate seat in Texas, you can't have that same kind of fiery personality. You can't be you can't be Jesse Jackson. You have to be Barack Obama when it comes to personality. And from the little bit I know about Allred, that seems to be his personality to begin with. But I think he also understands that he has to be seen as someone who is going to build coalitions and to build bridges.
I agree, but I think more of it, I absolutely agree with that. But at the same time, it's also trying to get the vote, the Republicans who maybe will come over.
Moderates.
Yes, because he absolutely needs those votes, and we're in Texas, obviously, and he knows what he's facing, and you can't do that when you're the firebrand, right? When you're so far left, and so he's trying to be right there in the middle, and he's upsetting. Of course, there's a lot of Democrats. If you look at anything on Twitter, of course, it's Twitter X, not even Twitter anymore, X, and you see that he has a lot of people who are not happy with him, right? Colin on there, and they're Democrats, and but they want the firebrand. But I think when you talk about the voter in Texas and the people who are actually going to show up, they want somebody who is more, of course, is not so far to the left, but at least is more to the
And it's something that's been tested out in Texas. We saw was Mike Collier run for lieutenant governor twice, basically as a moderate on the idea that I'm going to be acceptable. But then you always have the question of is he going to excite the base enough? And having said that, nobody on the ballot would have beaten Dan Patrick probably in these elections anyway, because that's the state we're living in. But this is the debate.
And I'm afraid that's going to be the
Texas
issue here
for years, which is do we get a moderate who's going to be acceptable?
Right.
to to Republicans who are thinking that the state has gone too far to the right?
Yeah.
Or do you go with somebody who's just going to energize the base?
Yeah, and I mean, if you look at the undecided vote in this poll, they found that there's a
That's a great point.
pretty
Thank you.
sizable chunk,
Almost 40%,
right? Exactly, who haven't made up their minds, and they're predominantly Hispanic Democrats, Gen Z, and millennials.
Yeah.
So you have to think ahead to a runoff, because it seems like you're pretty likely to get Roland Gutierrez in a runoff with Colin Allred. And I don't know, passion and kind of that fiery sensibility that Roland Gutierrez has. If you look at the undecided, it's like maybe that's more appealing to them. Like maybe he has an edge going into a runoff.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up, because I mean, I think in that poll, Colin Allred was well ahead, but he was at 29%. So that's very far from.
That's the issue with Allred is the paradox is that in a way he's kind of, and maybe he is kind of running the kind of campaign maybe to general election campaign to when he gets to be on the stage with Cruz. At the same time, he's going to have to show some passion against Cruz, where one of the things that's in Gutierrez's favor is that you can kind of, you kind of get your blood coursing a little bit when you kind of picture Gutierrez on the stage with Cruz in debates in October.
And not only about Uvalde and gun safety, but also about abortion and other. I mean, we've heard him talk on a number of issues. Yeah.
And one of the things that he talked about both at the Sunday debate and when the candidates met with the editorial board Monday morning, is he's criticized Colin Allred for voting for, I think there were 14 Democrats who voted for this resolution, denouncing the Biden administration's quote unquote open border policies. And Roland Gutierrez has said that was sort of throwing President Biden under the bus. He's also called for busting the Senate filibuster as a way of getting things. I think was that on the abortion issue? Was it that he was using that, because obviously that's the filibuster is a big impediment to Democrats ever codifying Roe v. Wade, through legislation. So he's definitely come down hard on these issues. Whereas I think Colin Allred has said that he's willing to tinker with the filibuster, but not eliminate.
And Allred was uncomfortable, he said, with some of the language in that resolution, specifically the open borders. It's one of those things, those resolutions where when you first saw the news story that he had signed his name onto it, you kind of understood what he was doing and why he was doing it. But on the other issue, I think Roland is correct in calling him out for it. And
right.
Yeah. Going to be a really interesting race to watch. And I think we're going to wrap things up there. Thanks to everybody for listening and watching, and we hope everyone's doing well. We'll be back next week. Take care.